Let's talk a little bit about a fourth step and a fifth step and a sixth step and all those things. We wake up, we come to, that's the language of the program, that waking up. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. And part of the work we need to do is an inventory and a sharing that inventory, and then looking at the ways we're out of balance and hoping to try to restore balance. I've lived with Chinese people in my house, some wonderful men, but Chinese people don't think like me. There's a whole different culture and ethos, and the big influence in Chinese thinking and understanding is Confucius. And everything's in balance or out of balance. That's like Chinese medicine. I've had some arthritis stuff, and you go to the Western people and they do things, and then you go to your acupuncturist and they do things, and the Chinese people, and you're out of balance, and therefore it's a very interesting conversation, and some of the things that we've had trouble with, and some of the things that have caused us grief or upset or misery, they're not bad if there's just a little bit of them, but there's just too much, too fast, too often. And so we're thrown out of balance. And I, as an older person, when I'm out of balance, I notice it pretty quickly. Keeping an eye on the hungry and the angry and the lonely and the tired. If I'm caught by surprise, if I have no blood sugar, if I haven't been with friends recently, boy, I can overreact to stuff. So we look at this every day. Bill Wilson, when he writes about a fourth step, writes about resentments and fears and sexual stuff and money. Those were the things that made his life crazy. And it's just making lists, not the great novel, not the, this is not publishable, this is not going to win you a Nobel Prize. This is just writing down in these 4 large areas of life what's been out of balance, what's been crazy. And I was told if I did not do a fourth step, I would drink again. So that was big motivation. But how do you start, And there's columns and there's lists, and you can get very obsessed with the book, and there's workshops on this. And the only thing I'd like to say about the fourth step is it's so important to do, it's worth doing badly. And you want to get it done. And then later on, more stuff will come up. Write that down and share that as it happens. But just get it done. I wrote whenever I was upset, and as soon as I was no longer upset, I stopped writing. So my fourth step took about 18 months to do. But I wasn't writing for 18 months. I think in that 18 months, I was writing for probably a week. And resentments, I've got them. Well, what happened and what's my place? Just to know, and sometimes, it's not nice to be angry, so that'll kill you. Disappointments and hurts, and and fears. I've got some fear. I've heard this at meetings. I don't know if they've said this in Jerusalem, but you cannot have fear and faith. Oh, of course you can. Many of us do. Relax. A lot of faith and a little fear, a lot of fear, a little faith. Yes, right here. And even if there's I need to do the footwork and walk through this, even if the fear is there, and I'm afraid of being disabled, I'm afraid of being sick, I'm afraid of needing help. That's scary. I'm afraid of losing control. I'm afraid of being a fool. All that stuff. And sexual stuff. A lot of us have had sexual experience that's been selfish, out of balance. And I know in the religious communities, there's an awful lot of intensity about sexual stuff. And it helps to be able just to take a look at, where have I been selfish? Where have I been a jerk? Where have I used it to manipulate? Sexual stuff. I had some real shame about some of that. And I had never talked about some of that with another adult until I did my 4-step. And money. Money makes us crazy. And there are 12-step groups for dealing with money. Spenders Anonymous, Debtors Anonymous. And a lot of people have shame around the money stuff. Because they owe money. They've thrown money away. They've stolen from people who trusted them. Gamblers Anonymous groups. I mean, there's stuff there. So I did it like that, and when I was 2 years sober, I read my list to my sponsor, and it took about an hour. Now you'll also hear people who needed many hours. I'm not that interesting. I'm boring and repetitive and selfish. I remember, it's like my sponsor was over here, and I couldn't look at him, but I explained. I had something in my writing that was ambiguous. And as I read this ambiguous statement to him, it was clear to me, I better clarify this. Let's say what's really going on there. And I explained it to the floor. I couldn't look at him. I kind of explained it to the floor. And I was more of a jerk than one might have thought if one wasn't listening. Terry, my sponsor, just listened. And at the end of our time together, he said one thing's real clear. And I just went, oh, no. I'm going to get a judgment or a proclamation or a diagnosis. He said, both you and I need this program very much. Notice, you and I need this program. And then he left. I was thrilled to see him go. Oh, God. Because I didn't want to discuss this. It doesn't say discuss. It says share, admit. And then I didn't call him the next day because I had shame. And I wasn't sure how he'd think about some of my activities. So I just stayed away from, I went to different meetings. And in the middle of Los Angeles, there's a Wilshire Boulevard temple, on Wilshire Boulevard. And the rabbi was a man named Joseph Magnan, long-standing in the community. And every year around Passover, he'd invite all the neighbors in, all the clergy within, 2 square miles. And come on, and we spent some time, and we had some prayer, and we had some social. And I went. I just lived a mile away, and my sponsor was there. And I waved at him across the room, and, am I going to get a lecture? Am I going to get where have you been? You should have been calling, all that. Authority figures freak me out. And he just said, oh, I'm so glad to see you. He likes me. And I finally met someone that I could trust. Because he didn't give me a lot of self-help books, and the Bible, read all that. He just was glad to see me. And then he said, I want to tell you, in this 5th step where, all the first 4 steps you can do pretty much by yourself. I mean, some people, do the 3rd step with it. But a lot, you can do them all by yourself. But the 5th step is where you have to include another human being. And as the other human being, I just want to tell you, keep showing up. You're doing the footwork. You can have a life in recovery. I've heard 5th steps, and a lot of people are anxious about stuff. And frequently it's about sexual stuff. Sometimes it's about money. Boy, I heard some guy years ago, he was a young guy, he was not getting to the point. He was talking, and you could just sense. So what are you not telling me? What's the secret? Oh, he got very tense. Well, he was 13 years old. And he was out with some boys being 13 years old. And they had some beer, and they wanted to do something really bad. This can be a discussion among 13-year-olds. What's the worst thing we can do? Let's do that. And they were all from fundamentalist Christian backgrounds. And they said, let's burn a Bible. And they did. And he was expecting to be struck dead. And he was terrified of being struck dead every day since. So it was 10 or 20 years, but this is the first time he talked to another adult about this. And I'm a college graduate. I said, God's intelligent, right? Oh, yeah. And God knows everything, right? Oh, yeah. And God knows that 13-year-old boys are idiots, right? I guess so. So he's going to give you a pass on this one, And he said, really? I said, I'm pretty sure. God can figure out you were being a jerk. And 13, relax. But he had never talked with that. Some stuff that comes up in the fifth step can be very scary for people. And I got a guy who called, and he said he was going to he needed to do a fifth step, and I said, well, I have time Thursday afternoon. Couple hours? He said, I need 6 days. He said, I've done this by the book. And there's guides to the fourth step, that are horrifying. Yes, no, how many times? About everything in the world, plus 5. And I said, what? He said, I need 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon for 6 days. This is a thorough step. And I said, I don't have the time. I really don't have the time. And I no one's that interesting, by the way, just to do 6 days. The complete Hamlet, with no editing, is about 3.5, 4 hours. And there's a lot of murders in Hamlet. So if you have a lot of murders in your fourth step, I'm willing to go 3 hours, but otherwise, cut to the chase, please. The exact nature of your wrongs. Well, I broke into cars and I stole radios. And here's the list of all the cars. Here's their license numbers. And here's the kind of radios. And there's 300 of them. There was a blue car. Here's a license number. No. Ah! The exact nature of your wrong is you're a thief. Give 3 interesting examples. Move on. Seems to me. Anyway, this guy told me I was a bad priest and I should be ashamed of myself. And many have said that. So, but he manipulated. There was a retired priest or a Jesuit named Jack Martin, and Jack was over in the University of San Francisco, and he taught economics or something like that, which is incomprehensible to me. But he had a doctorate in it. He was a big teacher, and he was a terrible drunk, and he was a terrifying person. When he retired from the classroom at 65, he got sober. And he became a much nicer human being. And I knew he was, in his early 80s, but he was over in San Francisco, retired. So I told this guy, you might want to give Jack Martin a call. He's a retired guy. He's not as busy as I am. And so I gave him the phone number and hang up. Then I did my stuff. And about 2 weeks later, I went over to San Francisco. And I went to the University of San Francisco for lunch to the Jesuit community there to visit with Jack, who I've always liked. Even when he was a drunk, I thought he was hilarious. And that goes a long way in my book. But he was mean hilarious, but mean. Anyway, how's Jack? Oh, they said he was at the hospital this morning on the treadmill, heart attack, dropped down dead. They plugged him in. He's in his room. So he'd had a long, interesting morning, and I went to see it. I mean, and I said, Jack, what happened? He said, day at a time. I'm only here today, glad to be sober. And then he paused and he said, you sent me an interesting guy. And I said, what'd you do? He said, well, when he told me 6 days, I said, listen, I'm an old man. I don't have 6 days. If you'd reduce it to 4 pages, I'm willing to listen. And I just went, don't overthink step 4. Just get it done. Defects of character, you know. Now, in the book, and this is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, 4th edition, there's a short story called He Sold Himself Short. In the book, it's on page 263. It's a guy from Chicago who goes to Akron, Ohio in the late 30s, and he meets Dr. Bob. And Dr. Bob did not like public speaking, and Dr. Bob was evidently good one-on-one with men. Dr. Bob didn't really like women all that much. I think they made him nervous. We understand, you know that. But anyway, this guy gets there, and he says on the bottom of page 262, the day before I was due to go back to Chicago, it was Dr. Bob's afternoon off. He had me to the office, and we spent 3 or 4 hours formally going through the 6-step program as it was at that time. The 6 steps were, now this is before Bill makes them 12. Number 1, complete deflation, crash and burn. 2, dependence and guidance from a higher power. 3, moral inventory. 4, confession. 5, restitution. 6, continued work with other alcoholics. Dr. Bob led me through all these steps. At the moral inventory, he brought up several of my bad personality traits. So Bob's been watching. Doctors watch you all the time, by the way. Nurses too. They're checking your pulse and your complexion. They're checking you out. They can't help themselves. So Dr. Bob has been paying attention to this guy. It's his 4th step, but Dr. Bob talks first. Here are some things I've noticed in you. And here's the list. He brought up several of my bad personality traits or character defects, such as selfishness, conceit, jealousy, carelessness, intolerance, ill temper, sarcasm, and resentments. It's not Bill's list. So one of the reasons to mention, there's at least 2 different ways of doing this in the old days. Not just one only way to do it. Selfishness, conceit, jealousy, carelessness, intolerance, ill temper, sarcasm, and resentments. Now, I took some time off. I went to a monastery in New Mexico, very romantic, when I was 20 years sober, and I read the book. I spent a week there, and I just read the stories in the back. And when I got to this page, this jumped off the page into my brain, because this is my craziness. I'm full of selfishness, conceit, jealousy, carelessness, intolerance, ill temper, sarcasm, and resentments. And so I asked my sponsor, shouldn't I be over this by now? You know, I mean, shouldn't I be better by now? So I got home and I asked Terry, shouldn't my defects of character be removed? And he said, we ask to have them removed. We do not ask to have them erased. They're removed. And they're in the attic or the back room or the basement. And they stay there until there's stuff out of balance. And then they hook up in groups of 2 and 3, you know, and ambush me and anyone else in the room. And then I have to promptly admit when I'm wrong and clean up my mess. I think my first 10 years sober, I was wrong 5 or 6 times. And now I'm wrong a lot. And you clean up the mess. I was at a meeting in Los Angeles. I'm 7 hours north of Los Angeles. We don't even talk to those people. But anyway, I was at a meeting in Los Angeles. And I mentioned I get angry all the time. And someone there said, if you were really spiritual, you'd never get angry. God, that's just stupid. Have you completed your GRE? I mean, this is so embarrassing. So, but each year of recovery gives us one more second of response time. So I didn't have to say the first thought. Narcotics Anonymous says first thought wrong. And my first thought would have been, you stupid. That's not. So instead, I had a few seconds, and I said to this person, that's very helpful. Which is sarcasm. But I didn't think this person would understand that, so I let it pass. But I do get angry, and I do get frightened. And I do, if you catch me by surprise, I can behave very badly. I can bark at people. I've been rude to folks in line. I mean, this is ordinary stuff. I've got all that. I get a daily reprieve from the worst of my crazy if I stay in some kind of balance. And I ask God to help me deal with this stuff day at a time. And when I work a program and do the footwork, even in the most simple ways, I don't have trouble with these things. I usually know, last minute, how I'm doing spiritually and emotionally by the way I drive. I mean, I'm just, nothing but bliss and wisdom until I get behind the wheel of a car. And then I can be a very bad driver because I get angry. I've got to watch that. I took the senior driving course for old people, and it helped. I'm a much better driver now than I was 10 years ago. But they told us things like the right of way is to let the other person pass. That can't be right. No, the right of way means I get to go let the other person go. Daily reprieve from the worst of my crazy, and I get that on a daily basis. But defects of character, and slowly over time, I'm better with this stuff. But I do notice my prejudices are still there. I can usually keep them in check, but my prejudices are all still there. And my intolerance and my crankiness. So there.
So I'm one of those obsessive compulsive people with inventory, but I've learnt to tone it down. I don't know if any of you have ever had a blood test, but when you go for a blood test, they only take maybe a teaspoonful of blood, or maybe 2 or 3 teaspoonfuls of blood. I never know why doctors measure blood in utensils used to eat food. Just ponder that next time you're at the hospital. But they don't take all of your blood, because they can take a small amount and learn whatever they need to learn from that small amount. A sponsee of mine many years ago, who was of the Sikh religion, very big family. She had 13 or 14 brothers and sisters. Both parents had had 13 or 14 brothers and sisters. All of them had had children. And my sponsee had a big mouth. And when she did her list of people she resented, 676 names, 640 of them were relatives of one of the first and second degrees of separation. So all sort of siblings and aunts and nephews and nieces and cousins. She had a rolling pin and she knew how to use it. There was a lot of damage done. And by damage, I mean like physical damage with the rolling pin. There are a lot of people. But when I take people through step 4, it does help. I find it helps to write a full list of all of the names of the people that bother me. But once I've got because it gets it out of my system, I know there's nothing hiding then. Because the ego hides in the dark. You know the game they play on the street with 3 cups and there is an object under one of the cups and you have to guess which cup the object is under. Whichever one you guess, you're wrong, because they move the cups around and they do something. If you lift up all the cups, that's how you discover there's nothing there at all. And it's like that with completeness when I do a full... When I've got all the names, I think, is there anything else in step 8? Is there anything else? No. Good. This, I can draw a line around this, say my entire problem is inside this line. And I can, somehow I can relax then. But then, what I discover is if I do some detailed work on 10 to 20 of those people, it tells me everything I need to know about me. And I look at the rest, and they're all just the same situation wearing a different hat. No offence to anyone wearing a hat. The same thing over and over and over again. Historical reenactments. You know, they have it in America and in England, they do historical reenactments of old battles from old wars, the War of the Roses and so on. Most of the situations are simply historical reenactments. If I take a few of the big situations and get real clarity on those, the rest start to go poof. And I think it's the same thing. And you know what? 20 is a lot. The first 5 often tell you everything you need to know. Sometimes the first person where you really look at it carefully tells you 95% of the person's character, and nothing interesting comes. You go through the motions to practice the method, but the first few will tell me everything I need to know. One mistake I've made with the inventory steps is doing lots of writing but missing the point. And the point of the resentment inventory, one of the points of the resentment inventory is to learn a method of getting over it. You know Bill C, don't you, from Torrance, where he says the 2 things you need to know about your childhood. Number 1, it was very, very long, and number 2, it's over. And at some point, I needed to put those situations to bed. And there's a bit of the big book, bottom of 66, top of 67, I find very useful. It talks, actually on 66, we fought to have our own way. And my sponsor says, you're only ever upset because you haven't got your own way. The only way not to be upset is not to have a way. If you don't have a way, things can't not go it. Things can only not go your way if you have a way to start with. So I've got to release the demands that things be as I wish, because the fact is, almost nothing will be as I think it's going to be. Let's just get that one clear first. But secondly, when I get what I want, it doesn't fix me. And that's when the wind really starts to blow cold. I remember I got a qualification at some age and I was very pleased with myself for about 5 minutes. Then I thought I lost 3 years of my life trying to get that qualification. 5 minutes later, it's practically useful, but it means nothing. When I get so these demands that people behave a certain way, I've got to recognise, if they behave the way I want them to, I wouldn't be happy, I would find something else. You see, I'm a resentment looking for a cause. The resentment comes first, and then the cause is like a cinema screen which the film is projected onto, which is why all of those Norwegian sailors each saw a different story, because their own psychology was buried inside each one. It's so interesting. I'm now sponsoring half. No, not really. I'd love to, though. I'd love to interrogate. So it would have been another great career. Anyway, so to release the demand, there's one thing discerning that something is not the way it should be. And there's another thing wagging my finger, moralising about it. And the best example is when you get a new puppy it's going to do its business on the kitchen floor. If you get a cat, it will scratch everything, including you. It's tens of thousands of years of evolution have created these two situations. Puppies pee, cats scratch. Yes, they shouldn't scratch, maybe, and maybe you can clip the claws, but it's not a moral question. And when people are behaving badly, when I behave badly, I'm driven. Talks in the book on 62 about being driven by these forces inside me. So they're driven as well. So why am I being moralistic about it? They're in the grip of something which is more powerful than them. And I'm in no position to squawk about people misbehaving. So to drop the demands, to drop the moralisation, to identify with them. Often people haven't behaved badly, they've just not behaved the way I want them to behave. But even if there is genuine bad behaviour, what fears might have motivated that? And have I ever been frightened in the areas of how other people treat me, or my material circumstances, or my basic needs, or my ambitions, or my pride, what other people think of me, or my self-esteem, what I think of myself? Are they frightened in those areas? Might that explain why they're doing what they're doing? Have I ever had fears in one of those areas? Yes. And I seek to identify with them until I can see that I'm looking at myself in a slightly different form, but the substance is the same. Very difficult to carry on hating someone when you really, really identify with them. For me, it takes the wind out of it. And finally, to mentally express love towards them and ask God, how can I be helpful? And the answer is, Tim, keep your big, fat mouth shut. Stay out of their way. That's the most helpful thing I can do for most people. On the continuation of the resentment inventory, there are these questions on page 67. And what I love about the method in the big book is the only three things I can change, slightly different words, but it's the same ideas: what I believe, what I think, and what I do. And it's those 8 questions on page 67. I take them to each of those problem situations with people and to each area of my life. So I'll take these questions to my diet, my relationship with food, my relationship with my own body, my relationship with God. So not just the people I resent, my relationship with work, my relationship with money. And 8 questions, very simple, they hugely overlap. Mistakes. What false beliefs do I have here? Selfish. Where do I put myself in front of other people? Unreasonably. There's nothing selfish about self-care, but there is something selfish about wanting to be in charge of other people's lives. Another form of selfishness is where I put my short-term gain over my long-term benefit. So where I let myself sleep in, I miss my home group. One of my home groups is a little morning thing. I miss that because I want the short-term gain of a few more minutes of sleep. But what I'm missing is the sense of connection I get with all these other people that then lasts throughout the day. And that's a form of... I can be selfish without anyone else being in the room. Self-seeking, what am I after? Frightened, what am I scared of not getting? And, just some really obvious things. I'm scared of change on a planet where things change a lot. I can't fix that. What I can get is a daily reprieve from a higher power that enables me to live in a world where things are changing and I don't like it. But moment by moment I can be okay. But I've got to know what the problem is before I can turn it over. I don't understand why that's the case. If I can name it, in The Witches of Eastwick, which is not a conference-approved film yet, but should be, in The Witches of Eastwick. That was an age test, by the way. The devil, if you can name the devil and remember the name, you end up with, you have power over the devil. And it's like that with my defects. If I can find the language to name it, it gives me the ability to turn it over somehow. I don't understand how that works. But that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to name things with those 8 questions. Dishonesty. Where did I lie? Where did I distort? Where did I conceal? Where did I scheme? Where was I to blame? I tried to orchestrate a group conscience to work in a particular way many years ago, and I sidled up to the secretary of the meeting to get the ball rolling with my plan, and I said, "So, are you ready to take the group conscience this Sunday?" And you see, when I'm scheming, I don't realise that everyone knows exactly what I'm doing. I think I'm being subtle and clever, and they know that I'm being a jerk. And it dominoes. That was the first domino, and many other dominoes fell until the whole group was furious with me. Where was I to blame? Where did I set the ball rolling? Sitting next to this bloke asking a perfectly innocent question, except it wasn't. Where was I to blame? What are my character defects? I have a list. I pick off the list. If I look at the word and I go, ouch, I've got it. Doesn't take long. If there's a word for it, it's because other people have done it, which is why they needed to come up with a word for it. It's really helpful. This is why I think maybe the language helps. If you can express it in language, it means that other people have done it as well, which means you're not the only one. I used to think I had problems which couldn't be expressed in language. I actually said to Maureen, who sort of was my first sponsor, I said to her, Elisheva knows this story, I said to her, Maureen, I was 6 weeks sober. I said, I can express myself effectively only through the medium of poetry. So I won't be doing a step 4, Maureen. And she told me, again, I'm not going to say the bad word. She said a very bad word to indicate that I was wrong, and I understood this. And mercifully, I was wrong. That I thought, but the professionals were wonderful, but they couldn't name what was wrong. And the housewives of Wimbledon were able to name what was wrong in a few words. And I thought, that's it. Every time they explained it, I said, that's it. I now know what to call this thing. What are my wrongs? What did I do to other people that I need to make amends for? All my fears, so there's a fear inventory, boil down to who am I? What am I worth? And what's my purpose? The only answers to those which leave me at peace are that I'm part of a universal consciousness that happens to be running around in a physical form for the time being. One of your friends says that death is a fairly major change of address. Mm-hmm. And I love that. So I'm part of a universal consciousness that happens to be using a physical form. What is my value? There were some kittens outside here before I went and played with them. And I see each of those kittens, and I think each of those little kittens is of infinite value. Well, so is everyone else. Everyone, including the people at your home group. Sorry to break it to you. Infinite value. The question is settled. Whether I can feel that on a given day is another question. But let's just settle the question now. Because I exist, I'm of value. What is my purpose? I don't know, and I don't need to know. What I need to know is God's will for me today, which is the things I'm supposed to do today. And what can I do? I can do what is possible. 2 points about sex. The first point is the book talks about some of us will have very extreme views on sex. So some people will say that sex is a very, very bad thing, and other people will want to have us on uses a very strange phrase, a straight pepper diet. And I didn't understand this for so long. It makes sense to me now. Pepper is not one of the major food groups. If I'd never had pepper again, none of my organs would stop functioning. It's a condiment, it's not a meal. Whereas to me, sex was one of the food groups of life. It is a means of communicating in a certain context with certain people in a certain way. It is not, for me, an activity in itself. The second thing was about moral arbiters. We're not going to be the moral arbiters of other people's sex conduct. I went to a very liberal school. It was a very quirky place, high school. It was a very quirky place where their aim was to bring out your personality and let you become whoever you wanted to be. And if someone just wanted to do sculpture, they kind of let them just do sculpture. If someone just wanted to run, they kind of let them do that. You had to do a bit of maths, you had to do a bit of English, you had to do some classes, but they wanted you to become yourself. Very liberal background. Lived in London, very liberal place, with the value, you can do anything with anyone, and it's fine as long as everyone is consenting, we're all adults, it's all fine. And if you can't, you got a hang up. You need to get over it, because you're obviously being repressed by the society of the United Kingdom, and history and whatever. I found for myself, I get to make my own decision. And I've discovered I can't do what a lot of people do and say is all very modern and progressive. I'm very old-fashioned, I've discovered, and I'm okay with that now. And I was trying to make myself into someone I wasn't by copying the society around me. I don't have to copy anyone. I'll finish on this. My first male sponsor, Doug, said, your defects won't go away, they'll get landscaped, and your job is not to become me, your job is to become you. Your job is to become the you that you were meant to be, which is not a version of your sponsor and is not a version of anyone else. So I think that probably wraps it up.
I heard someone say, sex is nobody's business but the three people doing it and the cameraman. I just asked that. Let's end with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things
I cannot change,
the courage
to change the things I can,
and the wisdom
to know the difference.
Hooray!